The silence after the final gavel fell was the loudest sound Clara had ever heard. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a winter morning, or the hushed reverence of a library. This was a dense, cottony void, pressing in on her eardrums, absorbing the echo of the judge's final decree: dissolution of marriage granted, joint custody as outlined. The words felt less like a legal ruling and more like a surgeon's pronouncement after a failed operation. The patient, their family, was officially split in two, and the prognosis was a lifetime of careful, painful management. Across the polished expanse of the courtroom, Lucas Evans adjusted the cuff of his tailored shirt, a small, precise motion. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on some middle distance, his expression one of somber, wounded dignity. He had perfected that look over the 12 months of proceedings. The noble patriarch, fighting not for himself, but for the sanctity of his children's world against an unpredictable force. Her Clara's lawyer, a kind, tired-looking woman named Patricia, touched her elbow. "It's done, Clara. You have the primary physical. The schedule is clear. It's a good framework. A framework, like the timber skeleton of a house after a fire, blackened and stark against the sky. It outlined where rooms used to be, but nothing kept out the wind." Maya was 11, a kaleidoscope of fierce intelligence and sudden, baffling tears. Leo had just turned 8, a quiet boy who spoke more in the language of Lego towers and carefully detailed dinosaur drawings than in words. They were waiting at her sister's house, shielded from the cold theater of the courtroom. Clara's only thought was to get to them, to fold them into her arms and whisper promises she wasn't sure she could keep. That home would still feel like home, that she was still their mom, that love wasn't a finite resource divided by a court order. The first weeks were a fragile pantomime of normalcy. Lucas moved into a modern, minimalist apartment across town, all sharp angles and cold surfaces. The children would go there every other weekend and one evening a week. Clara would pack their bags with a meticulousness that felt like ritual, triple-checking for favorite pajamas, the right stuffed animal, the specific brand of granola bar Leo liked. The handoffs in parking lots or at her doorstep were brief, civil, and colder than the deepest winter chill. The change didn't come as a storm. It arrived as a shift in the atmospheric pressure. So gradual, you only notice the headache once it's already pounding. It started with small questions, usually from Leo, voiced in the hesitant darkness of bedtime. "Mom, Dad said you didn't like the big tree in the backyard anymore. Is that why you cut the big branch off?" Clara had hired a tree surgeon to remove a limb diseased with fungus, a danger to the house. She'd explained it to them at the time. "No, honey, it was sick. It could have fallen and hurt someone." "Oh," Leo would murmur, but the doubt lingered in the silence. Maya's interrogations were more direct, delivered with the penetrating stare of a junior prosecutor. "Dad says you always hated going to his company picnics, that you thought his friends were boring." Clara had found some of Lucas's colleagues insufferable. It was true. She'd also smiled, made small talk, and packed memorable potato salad for 5 years running. "Sometimes adult social events can feel a bit long, sweetie, but I never hated his friends. He said you called Mr. Henderson a windbag." Maya's eyes were sharp. A guilty flush crept up Clara's neck. She had, once, in a private venting session to Lucas after a particularly tedious evening. He had laughed and agreed. Now, her private frustration, shared in confidence with her then-husband, was being weaponized and fed back to their daughter as evidence of her snobbery, her disdain for his world. She wanted to scream. She wanted to sit them down and present a PowerPoint dismantling Lucas's narrative. Here is the truth about the tree branch. Here is the context for the windbag comment. Here is a list of every single picnic I attended and enjoyed. But she didn't. A deep, instinctual warning bell clanged in her soul. To engage was to step onto the battlefield he was preparing. It would turn their childhood into a debate club. Every memory, a piece of evidence for one side or the other. She chose, instead, the fortress of quiet consistency. "I'm sorry if it seemed that way to Dad," she would say, her voice even. "I know those picnics were important to him. I remember you winning the 3-legged race with him one year. You were so fast." She would redirect, always, to a true and positive memory that centered them, not him or her. Her silence was not passive. It was an active, exhausting construction. She built routines like seawalls, Taco Tuesdays, Saturday morning pancake animals, Sunday night movie marathons with homemade popcorn. She showed up for every school event, front row, clapping too loudly. She helped with projects, listened to practice recitals, sat through endless retellings of playground dramas. She loved them openly, lavishly, and without demanding anything in return, especially not their allegiance. Lucas, meanwhile, weaponized fun. His weekends were a parade of spectacle, trips to amusement parks, movies on opening night, extravagant toys that Clara's budget couldn't match. He documented it all in a stream of social media posts, beaming children on roller coasters, smothered in ice cream, hugging him tightly, #making memories, #dadlife, #blessed. The captions were subtle daggers, so important to give them joy and stability during tough transitions. The implication was clear. Joy and stability were commodities only he could provide, and the whispers continued, growing more sinister. "Ma," Leo asked one night, his voice small, "are you sad all the time? Dad said you get really sad and that's why we have to be quiet sometimes." Clara's blood ran cold. She had struggled with a period of mild depression after her mother's death 2 years prior. She had seen a therapist, taken medication for 6 months, and was in a healthy, maintained place. Lucas had been supportive then. Now, her past vulnerability was being recast as a permanent, threatening instability. "I was sad when Nana died, Leo. Very sad. Anyone would be. I got some help to feel better, and I did. I'm not sad all the time now. You never, ever have to be quiet because of me. Your noise, your laughter, that's my favorite sound in the world." But the seed was planted. She saw Leo watching her sometimes, a tiny frown on his face, as if waiting for her to crumple. The most brutal blow came from Maya. It was after a weeknight dinner at Lucas's. Maya slammed into the house, threw her backpack, and stormed upstairs. Clara followed, finding her daughter lying face down on her bed. "Honey, what's wrong?" Maya's voice was muffled by the comforter. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Tell you what?" Maya rolled over, her face ravaged by a betrayal more profound than adolescent anger. "That you're applying for jobs in Seattle." Clara felt the floor tilt. "What, Maya? I'm not." "Dad said he saw the emails on the old family computer. He said you're planning to move us there after the school year, to be near your college friend, and that you'll try to stop us from seeing him." It was a monstrous fabrication, built on a grain of sand. 6 months ago, her friend Sarah in Seattle had forwarded a job listing from a prestigious museum, saying, "This is so you." Clara had replied, "Wow, what a dream job. Not in the cards right now, but thanks for thinking of me." That was it. A 5-email exchange, dead and buried. "Maya, listen to me." Clara knelt by the bed, gripping the blanket. "Sarah sent me a job listing. I said no, because my life, you and Leo, are here. I am not looking for jobs anywhere. I am not moving. I would never, ever do that." Maya searched her face, the war raging in her eyes. The loyal, loving daughter versus the girl being systematically taught that her mother was a liar. "He sounded so sure," she whispered, echoing the phrase that would become a chilling refrain. That was the night Clara's silence almost broke. She wanted to drive to Lucas's sterile apartment, beat down his door, and shriek her truth into his smug face. The fury was a live wire in her chest. But she thought of Leo's anxious eyes, of Maya's torn expression. She thought of the battlefield. She went to the kitchen, called Patricia. "Can he do this? Just make up stories?" Patricia sighed, the sound carrying the weight of 1,000 similar cases. "Without tangible proof of harm, without him actively violating the custody order, it's very hard to litigate parental alienation. Clara, it's he said she said, and the court hates it. The best advice, the hardest advice, is to document everything. Keep being the constant. The truth has a way of surfacing." So Clara started a journal, not a diary of feelings, but a clinical log. March 14th. Leo asked if I get sad, said Dad told him so. Reassured him. March 22nd. Maya accused me of planning move to Seattle. Explained about singular email. Showed her the email chain. She printed the emails and put them in a folder, a sad little archive of her own innocence. She felt herself becoming a ghost in her own children's eyes. Their looks were no longer just doubtful. They were sometimes tinged with a faint, fearful resentment. She was the obstacle, the source of tension, the reason their father seemed so perpetually, tragically concerned. Her love became this sticky, complicated thing. His became this simple, fun escape. The loneliness was absolute. It was a vast, Arctic tundra inside her. Friends offered platitudes. "They'll see it when they're older. Just keep loving them." Her sister was more blunt. "You have to fight fire with fire, Clara. Tell them what a manipulative bastard he is. But that was the trap. To fight was to validate the war. So, she endured. She folded the laundry. She paid the bills from her strained freelance graphic design work. She fixed the leaky faucet, assembled the IKEA bookcase, and lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, imagining her love as a slow, steady drip of water on stone, hoping against hope it would eventually wear through the lies. Then, the call. It was a Thursday. She was in her basement workspace, which also housed the washer and dryer. The air was warm and carried the clean scent of fabric softener. She was wrestling with a client's impossible demand: make the logo bigger but also more subtle, when her phone vibrated. Lincoln Elementary. Her heart, so accustomed to low-grade panic, gave a familiar, unpleasant lurch. Clara, it's Janet Gable, in the front office. The secretary's voice was a tight wire of forced calm. We have a situation. Lucas is here. He's insisting on checking Maya and Leo out for a dental appointment. Clara's mind scrabbled. The dental appointment was next Tuesday. She had it on the calendar. That's not today, Janet. It's next week. I know. I showed him the calendar. Your note. He's insisting it was changed, that you forgot to tell him, and that he has to take them now. He's becoming quite agitated. He's demanding to see them. We've called the police as a precaution. They're on their way. You need to come, right now. The world didn't go black. It went hyper-focused. The hum of the dryer was a roar. The specks of dust in the shaft of light from the basement window were individual planets. Asterisk, he was there. He was trying to take them. Asterisk, the logical part of her brain, the part that kept logs and wrote polite emails, understood this was the catastrophic escalation. The primal part, the mother, felt only a hollow, howling wind where her insides used to be. She drove her body operating the car while her mind was 1,000 miles away, trapped in a future where her children were gone. The sight of the police cruisers in the school lot, their lights painting the brick walls in lurid streaks, made that future feel terrifyingly present. Inside, the orderly bustle of a normal school day had been replaced with a staticky tension. The principal, Mr. Davies, stood pale and grim near the entrance to the main office. He nodded silently to Clara and gestured inside. The scene was a frozen tableau of her worst fears. In the principal's private office, visible through an interior window, sat Maya and Leo. A police officer, a young woman with a kind face, was with them. Maya was crying, but silently, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. Leo was rigid, staring at a motivational poster about teamwork, his expression utterly blank, a small fortress of shock. And there, in the main office, stood Lucas. He was the center of the storm, yet he looked like he'd been blown apart by it. His hair was disheveled, his expensive overcoat was askew. He was talking rapidly to a tall, senior-looking police officer, his hands cutting the air. Complete misunderstanding. My ex-wife. She's chronically disorganized. She forgets to communicate. She's under a lot of strain. The appointment was moved. I have every right to take my children to a medical appointment. This is harassment. His voice was the same one he used in business meetings, confident, reasoning, but it had a wild, frayed edge. He turned and saw Clara. For a split second, his mask slipped entirely. She saw, not anger, but a raw, panicked desperation. Then the mask slammed back down, hardening into accusatory fury. There, ask her. She'll tell you she forgot. All eyes turned to Clara. The senior officer, his badge Red Hendricks, approached her. Ma'am, are you Clara Evans? Yes. Can you clarify the situation with the dental appointment for your children? Clara's voice, when it came, was quieter than she intended, but it didn't shake. The appointment is for next Tuesday, at 2 p.m., with Dr. Alvarez. I made it 6 weeks ago. I have the confirmation in my email. I have not changed it. I did not inform Mr. Evans of any change because there was no change to inform him of. Lucas made a sound of disgust. She's lying. Check her email. She's probably deleted it. She does this. She tries to cut me out. Officer Hendricks held up a placating hand. Mr. Evans, you stated your intent was to take the children to this appointment today, correct? Yes. And then, given her instability, I wasn't going to return them to a chaotic environment. I was going to keep them safe at my place until things were sorted out. The words hung in the air. I wasn't going to return them. Clara felt a cold clarity wash over her. This was it. The line, not just crossed, but vaporized. Officer Hendricks's demeanor changed, subtly but definitively. The posture of mediating a domestic dispute shifted to that of a criminal investigation. "Mr. Evans, you are aware of the custody order filed with this court?" He gestured to a flushed Mrs. Gable, who held up a printed document. "Of course I am. I'm their father. And that order stipulates pickup and drop-off times, and requires mutual agreement or a court order for deviation, correct?" Lucas spluttered. This was an emergency, a medical necessity. "A dental cleaning scheduled for next week is not a medical emergency, sir." Officer Hendricks's voice was flat. "You attempted to remove the children from school under false pretenses, in direct violation of a court order, and you have now stated your intent not to return them pursuant to that order. That constitutes attempted custodial interference." The legal term landed like a physical blow. Lucas blinked, his bravado finally cracking to reveal the confusion underneath. I was just trying to do what's best for them. She's poisoning them against me." From the inner office, Maya's voice, sharp and clear, with a pain that cut through the glass, rang out. "That's not true. You're the one who lies. You told us Mom was moving away." Leo, his small voice trembling but audible, added, "You said she was sick and we had to be quiet." The room went utterly still. All the whispered poisons, all the carefully planted doubts, were suddenly there, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit air, named aloud by the very children he claimed to protect. Lucas's face underwent a terrible transformation. The anger melted, leaving behind a waxen pallor of shock and dawning horror. He looked at Maya, at Leo, not as his avengers, but as his accusers. He looked at the stone-faced officers, at the principal's disapproving frown, and finally, at Clara. In her eyes, he didn't see triumph or rage. He saw a profound, exhausted pity. That, perhaps, was the most devastating thing of all. The police were polite but firm. They asked Lucas to come to the station for further questioning. They did not handcuff him. He went quietly, his shoulders slumped, the portrait of a man who had gambled everything on a lie and watched it detonate in his hands. As he passed Clara, he didn't speak. His eyes were empty, as if the script he'd been reading from for a year had suddenly ended, and he found himself on a dark stage with no lines left. In the aftermath, the silence returned, but it was a different creature. It was the ringing quiet after an explosion, where sound is temporarily impossible. Clara gathered her children. Maya clung to her, sobbing now with relief and delayed terror. Leo simply took her hand, his small fingers icy. She bundled them into the car. The drive home was wordless, but the space between them was no longer a minefield. It was a shared crater. They were all in it together. That night, routines were clung to like lifelines. Mac and cheese for dinner, a bath for Leo, Maya wanting her hair braided for bed, a ritual she'd rejected months ago as babyish. As Clara worked her fingers through her daughter's dark hair, Maya spoke to her reflection in the vanity mirror. He kept saying, "You forgot." He said it so many times, to the principal, to the police. "I almost wondered if maybe you had forgotten, if I was remembering wrong, but you weren't," Clara said softly, securing the end of the braid. "No," Maya said, meeting her eyes in the glass. "I wasn't." When they were asleep, Clara did not break down. She sat at the kitchen table, her logbook open. She didn't write in it. She just looked at the meticulous entries, the chronicle of a slow-motion siege. Then she closed it. She didn't need it anymore. The truth had staged its own dramatic, public intervention. The following days were a blur of necessary actions. Police reports, a frantic call from Lucas's lawyer, an emergency hearing where a judge, her face like granite, listened to the police report and suspended Lucas's unsupervised visitation, pending a full psychological and custody evaluation. The words parental alienation were finally uttered in court, not as a vague suspicion, but as a cited factor in a criminal charge. Lucas, through his lawyer, looked diminished, a paper version of the man he'd been. He did not contest the temporary orders. The real work, Clara knew, was just beginning. The school counselor, a gentleman named Mr. Reed, set up sessions for the children. He also recommended a family therapist for Clara and the kids, to navigate the path back to trust. The first session was brutal. Leo drew pictures of a big, dark cloud with little stick figures underneath it. Maya talked in furious, disjointed bursts about feeling like a puppet and not knowing what was real anymore. Clara just listened, her heart breaking and mending with every halting word. One afternoon, a week after the school incident, they were in the backyard. The autumn leaves were a fiery blanket. Leo was piling them into a mound, his movements less robotic than they'd been. "Mom," he said, not looking up, "is Dad a bad guy?" Clara put down her rake. She walked over and sat on the grass beside his leaf pile. That's a really hard question, buddy. I don't think people are usually just bad or good. I think your dad got very lost. He got very hurt when our family changed, and instead of dealing with that hurt in a healthy way, he made some very, very bad choices. Choices that hurt you and Maya. That doesn't make him a monster, but it does mean he has a lot of work to do before he can be a safe person for you to be around. Leo considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. So, he's like a broken toy. Something like that, Clara said, her throat tight. And broken toys can sometimes be fixed, but it takes time and the right tools. And sometimes, even when they're fixed, you remember that they broke, and you're more careful with them. Maya, who had been listening from the porch, came and sat on Clara's other side. I'm sorry I believed him, she said quietly. Clara put an arm around each of them, pulling them into her sides. Oh, my brave girl, you have nothing to be sorry for. You were being fed a story by someone you trusted. It's not your job to see through that. It's my job, and his job, to tell you the truth. I'm so sorry my silence felt like I wasn't fighting for you. I was fighting the only way I knew. How? By trying to give you a peaceful home to come back to. It was a quiet fight, Maya observed, leaning her head on Clara's shoulder. The quietest, Clara agreed. That winter came, then spring. The legal process ground on. Lucas entered a court-mandated parenting program. His interactions with the children, when supervised by a professional, were awkward and stilted. The grandiosity was gone, replaced by a nervous, fragile tentativeness. The children were polite but distant. In their own home, life began to truly breathe again. The invisible wall was gone. Laughter returned, unself-conscious and sudden. Arguments happened normal. Healthy arguments about screen time and chores and were resolved without the ghost of manipulation haunting the room. Clara started a new job, a good one with a local design firm. She didn't feel like she was barely holding the pieces together anymore. She was building something new, with stronger mortar. One evening in late spring, she stood at the sink, washing dishes. The window was open, and the scent of lilacs from the yard washed in. Maya was at the kitchen table, grinding through math homework. Leo was on the floor, constructing an elaborate spaceship from magnets. Clara looked at them, these two people she had fought for in silence, who were slowly, surely, finding their way back to her, and to themselves. The long-held breath of the past 2 years was finally, completely, released. It left not with a gasp, but with a soft, steady sigh that seemed to mingle with the lilac-scented air. The story wasn't over. There would be more hearings, more therapy, the long, complicated journey of whatever relationship the children might one day choose to have with their father. But the central, defining conflict, the war for their reality, was over. Truth had won, not with a shout, but by waiting patiently in the space between the words, until the lies grew so loud and so clumsy they tripped over their own feet and fell, shattering on the hard, unyielding ground of facts. She was no longer a ghost. She was their mother. And she was, finally, writing the next chapter herself. With the ink of quiet courage and the steadfast paper of a love that had refused to break. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.